Brahma Samhitam Aditavam Tudaparado Hichodvaya Payanaraham Idam this Bhagavatam Srimad Bhagavatam Nama of the name Puranam Vedic supplement Brahma Samhitam approved as the essence of the Vedas. Aditavam studied. Dwaparo Ado at the end of the Dwapara Yuga. Pichahu from the father. So from my father. Dwapayanat Dwapayana Vyasadev. Aham myself. Translation per Buddha's own grace, C.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation: at the end of the Dwapara Yuga, I studied this great supplement of Vedic literature named Srimad Bhagavatam, which is equal to all the Vedas, from my father, Srila Dwaipayana Vyasadev. Please repeat. At the end of the Dwapara Yuga, I studied this great supplement of Vedic literature named Srimad Bhagavatam, which is equal to all the Vedas, from my father, Srila Dwaipayana Vyasadev. Purport: the statement by Srila Sukadeva Goswami that the topmost transcendentalist, who is beyond the jurisdiction of regulations and restrictions, mainly takes to the task of hearing about and glorifying the personality of Godhead, is verified by his personal example. Sukadeva Goswami, being a recognized liberated soul and the topmost transcendentalist, was accepted by all of the topmost sages present in the meeting during the last 7 days of Maharaj Parikshit. He cites from the example of his life that he himself was attracted by the transcendental activities of the Lord, and he studied Srimad Bhagavatam from his great father, Srila Dwaipayana Vyasadev. Srimad Bhagavatam, or for that matter, any other scientific literature, cannot be studied at home by one's own intellectual capacity. Medical books of anatomy or physiology are available in the market, but no one can become a qualified medical practitioner simply by reading such books at home. One has to be admitted to the medical college and study the books under the guidance of a learned professor. Similarly, Srimad Bhagavatam, the postgraduate study of the science of Godhead, can only be learned by studying it at the feet of a realized soul like Srila Vyasadeva. Although Sukadeva Goswami was a liberated soul from the very day of his birth, he still had to take lessons of Srimad Bhagavatam from his great father Vyasadeva, who compiled the Srimad Bhagavatam under the instructions of another great soul, Srila Narada Muni. Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructed a learned Brahmana to study Srimad Bhagavatam from a personal Bhagavat. Srimad Bhagavatam is based on the transcendental name, form, attributes, pastimes, entourage, and variegatedness of the Supreme Person, and it is spoken by the incarnation of the personality of Godhead, Srila Vyasadeva. Pastimes of the Lord are executed in cooperation with his pure devotees, and consequently historical incidences are mentioned in this great literature because they are related to Krishna. It is called Brahma Samhitam because it is the sound representative of Lord Krishna, like the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is the sound incarnation of the Lord because it was spoken by the Supreme Lord, and Srimad Bhagavatam is the sound representative of the Lord because it was spoken by the incarnation of the Lord about the activities of the Lord. As stated in the beginning of this book, It is the essence of Vedic desire tree and the natural commentation on the Brahma Sutras, the topmost philosophical theses on the subject matter of Brahman. Vyasadeva appeared at the end of Dwapara Yuga as the son of Satyavati, and therefore the word Dwapara Ado, or the beginning of Dwapara Yuga, in this context means just prior to the beginning of Kali Yuga. The logic of this statement, according to Srila Jiva Goswami, is comparable to that of calling the upper portion of the tree the beginning. The root of the tree is the beginning of the tree, but in common knowledge, the upper portion of the tree is first seen. In that way, the end of the tree is accepted as its beginning. Or in other words, the top of the tree is accepted as its beginning. So, as we know, this pastime, Marge Prikshit is now about to hear Srimad Bhagavatam by Sukadeva Goswami by divine inspiration. Sukadeva Goswami has come there and has been taken the honoured seat, even though he's probably the youngest person there, about 16, 17 years old. But by his bodily features, he's understood that he's actually the most qualified person to speak. So he's taken the Vyasasan, the seat of Vyas, to speak Srimad Bhagavatam. As we know, Sukadeva Goswami, his natural spiritual master is his father, Srila Vyasadeva. I mean, generally, like Prabhupada mentions here, that we need to hear from a spiritual master. So whilst we don't hear specifically that Sukadeva Goswami was officially initiated as such, but it's understood his natural spiritual master is father, because within the womb he heard Srimad Bhagavatam being spoken. And of course later it's also from Srila Vyasadeva's disciples. They were reciting Srimad Bhagavatam to Sukadeva Goswami, so he's definitely well qualified to speak Srimad Bhagavatam in that sense. So, in the beginning of the purport, Prabhupada makes that the statement by Srila Sukadeva Goswami that the topmost transcendentalists is beyond the jurisdiction of regulations, restrictions, mainly takes to the task of hearing about and glorifying the personality of Godhead. So in Bhakti Yoga, the science of devotion, divided into two categories. There's Vaidhi Bhakti and Raganuga Bhakti. So Vaidhi Bhakti in the beginning is following rules and regulations under the instructions of the spiritual master. So it's basically a daily program. This is more or less, Vaidhi Bhakti, that's on the order of the Guru. We're attending the morning program, we're chanting our rounds, and we're performing service, hearing, reading, etc., etc. There may not be a strong taste in the beginning, but nevertheless, based on instructions of our spiritual superiors or those that we've been inspired to follow instructions from, we're following these rules and regulations. So this is Vaidhi Bhakti. But the more advanced stage is Raganuga, where it's spontaneous. That's one may not follow the strict rules and regulations, but they're spontaneously engaged in devotional service. So, of course, this is not a platform that one can take artificially. I always think of the classic example. I was hearing that one devotee was telling me in the Calcutta temple, there was one Indian man who was coming every day to take darshan of the deities during the evening arti, and he's always crying. And it was going on every day, and devotees started to get quite impressed. He's coming every day and he's crying in front of the deities. So they're thinking, this is Raganuga, this is spontaneous. As soon as he sees the deities, his emotions are coming. But anyway, one time he sneezed and a chili come out his nose. So it was all pretend, you know. So this is artificial, you know. It's not out of, genuine emotion for seeing the Lord. It's just trying to attract some sort of, attention from the others. Look at me, I'm crying so much in front of Krishna. So, but nevertheless, it is a valid platform, Raganuga, but it's something to achieve after long practice. We begin the Vaidhi. Of course, Raganuga could be there on the first day also, that somebody comes to the temple and they're attracted by the deities and they just spontaneously offer flowers to the deities. This is Raganuga, but it's not something that lasts. It's just temporarily spontaneous. But so in the beginning, Vaidhi Bhakti rules and regulations, and slowly we come towards it's more spontaneous. And we hear, different devotees who are on that platform that, like Vamsi Das Babaji, for instance, he was very spontaneous. He wasn't following any rules and regulations, because it was, in a sense, it was an impediment to the natural flow of his devotion, and he would be doing things which would almost put on the platform of avadut, that out of the normal range of activities. Like for instance, once, because he had a couple of assistants with him, and they were sort of looking after, his sort of paraphernalia, etc. But at one point, some thieves apparently came and stole all his deity paraphernalia and his cooking implements. And then the next day, somebody, hearing about that, brought a cooking pot for him so he could cook for his deities. And his deities, Gauni Tai, he chastised his deities, says, why don't you look after your things? A thief has come and has taken them. And he was particularly talking to Lord Nityananda. Says, Gora, I'm cooking this khichdi for you. Nityananda, you can get your own. But this is not artificial. This is genuinely the flow of devotion is going. It's something that can't be, artificially sort of presented. So, and actually Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he mentions that generally in this human form of life of following spiritual practice, it is our duty to follow the general principles of Varnashram Dham up until the point where it may become an impediment for one's spiritual practice. So this is sort of this Raganuga Bhakti. But even then, one follows the Varnashram, the different rules and regulations, generally speaking, even if one is beyond that level in a sense, because they're setting a good example for other devotees. That, if somebody sees that, this great devotee, he's not following all the rules and regulations, well, I don't have to also. No, he follows them just to give example. So, other devotees who are less mature, they don't artificially think they're on that same platform. So, Prabhupada, he mentions that these topmost transcendentalists mainly takes to the task of hearing about and glorifying the personality of Godhead. So we hear that Marj Prikshit, he's becoming perfect by hearing, and Sukadeva Goswami is becoming perfect by chanting. So this hearing and chanting, we have the 9 processes of devotional service. So these are mentioned in Bhagavatam 7.5.23. So, we all know the Shravanam, Kirtanam, etc. So the 9 processes of hearing, Shravanam. So as we mentioned, Maharaj Parikshit is the ideal example for this. With chanting Kirtanam, Sukadev Goswami, ideal example for this. Remembering Vishnu Smaranam, who is the ideal example given for remembering? Anybody like to say? Prahlad Maharaj, because even though his father was trying to kill him, Hiranyakasipu, Prahlad Maharaj was just fixed in remembering Krishna. It didn't matter what happened, he's the perfect example for that. Always remembering Lord Vishnu. And next one, Padasevanam, serving the Lord's lotus feet. Who is the ideal example? One of the ladies, ideal example. Serving the Lord's lotus feet. Radha is there, but she's not the one generally given. Specifically the Lord's lotus feet. So you have Lord Vishnu lying down on Anantasesh. Lakshmi, very good. Yeah, so you always see the picture, picture of creation, Lord Vishnu, Garbhodakshay Vishnu lying down on the bed of Ananta, and Lakshmi Devi is worshipping, massaging his feet. So that's her eternal engagement. Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune. And deity worship, Archanam, who is the ideal example for that? Prithu Maharaj, yeah. So we hear from Bhagavatam that every part of his body was engaged in worshipping the deities. The eyes seeing the deities, the ears hearing the names being chanted, and the nose smelling the incense and the flowers offered to the deity. His legs to take his body to the temple, his arms in offering paraphernalia. They mention even his body touching the other devotees like that. Every part of his body was used in worshipping the deities. And number 6, Vardhanam, praying. Who's the ideal example for praying to the Lord? Dhruva, not the one generally given. Akrura, yes. So we know Akrura, when he was going to Vrindavan to take Krishna and Balaram back to Mathura, and as he entered into Vrindavan, he saw, what did he see in the ground? Whose footprints? Krishna's footprints. And how did he know they were Krishna's footprints? Because they had all the signs under his feet. And so he was offering prayers. He was feeling himself most fortunate that he was able to offer prayers to Krishna's lotus feet, footprints in the sand, the dust of Vrindavan. And number 7, executing orders, or Dashyam. Dashyam means the servant of Krishna. Who's the ideal example? Hanuman, yes. So nothing was too difficult for Hanuman. He's the eternal servant of Ram. And mention the intimate servant of Ramachandra, executing all of Lord Ramachandra's orders despite all kinds of difficulties. And number 8, Sakyam, serving as a friend. Ladies, anybody? Idle example? Dhruva? No? I mean, of course, it's not that these other answers are wrong, but it's a specific one given. Who's the ideal friend of Krishna? Any ladies? You've got a hint. Arjuna. Arjuna is the ideal friend. They were never separated. And you're such an intimate friend that Krishna agreed to be the chariot driver, Arjuna, at the Battle of Kuru, etc. You know, generally the chariot driver is like the lower position, but that was such an intimate friendship there that Krishna said, I'll become your chariot driver. And number 9, complete surrender, Atma Nivedanam. Who's the ideal example? Ambarish, not the normal one given. Who surrendered everything? Huh? Robin? Draupadi. Not the normal one given, no. Bali Maharaj, very good. So we know the story of Amanadev. He begged Bali Maharaj for 3 steps of land, and so Bali Maharaj, despite the warning from his spiritual master Sukracharya, he says, okay, I'll give you 3, but then Vamanadev expanded, and he basically 1 step covered the whole universe. So anyway, we know the story. And the 3rd step, Vamanadev said, you offered me 3 steps, I've covered the whole universe with 2. Well, I put my 3rd step. So Bali Maharaj, you put it on my head. So he surrendered everything to Bali Maharaj. Okay, so good to remember that when we're engaged in a particular service. These are the 9 recommended processes of devotional service. And so if we're engaging in one of these, we can remember the ideal example, the personality who become perfect in that particular activity. So, but as we mentioned, hearing and chanting are considered the most important. And it's actually said that if a person makes a vow that I'll never speak a lie, never speak an untruth, and they maintain that vow for 12 years without saying even one little white lie, 12 years, and Kali Yuga is considered that this is the ordinary, activities that people will lie and cheat and lots of bad qualities. But if somebody makes that vow for I will never speak an untruth, and they maintain that for 12 years, they become known as a Satyavak, one who never tells an untruth. And it's said that such a person, whatever they say will come to pass. Krishna is so appreciative of a person who's maintained that vow that Krishna will fulfill any prophecy, any statement that person makes. So if we apply that to Srila Prabhupada, what was he doing? Actually, it was 12 years, 65 to 77. For 12 years, what was he doing? He was constantly speaking the absolute truth. Wherever he went, he wasn't making anything up. He wasn't trying to trick or cheat people. He was just speaking on Krishna, the absolute truth. So therefore, obviously, according to this, we can say he was a Satyavak. For 12 years, he only spoke the absolute truth. So therefore, anything that Prabhupada spoke will come to pass. Krishna will fulfill that. So when Krishna says that if we're chanting Hare Krishna, engaging in devotional service, at the end of this life we'll go back home, back to Godhead. So because Prabhupada says that, Krishna is going to fulfill that instruction. We can have faith in that. So, and Prabhupada gave so many different instructions, but ultimately, the goal of spiritual life is to end this cycle of birth and death and go back home, back to the spiritual world. And Prabhupada's giving us the process by how to do that. And we know his Guru Maharaj Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he said one should chant 64 rounds every day. I think he gave a statement, unless you're chanting 64 rounds a day, you're not actually human, you're not on the human level. And but Prabhupada, when he came to the West and saw that, the Westerners, they just weren't able to come to that platform 64. So then he reduced 32, then 16. So in a sense, he's not following in the same process, giving the same instruction, his Guru Maharaj. But because Prabhupada is saying 16 rounds, Krishna is accepting that. This is my dear devotee. If his disciples follow 16 rounds, then the same benefit as 64 is going to be there. Such is the potency of the Acharya. So according to Prabhupada's instructions, if we follow those instructions, then Krishna will fulfill, will give us the result as per his pure devotee's desire. So it's also mentioned about Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam that we understand they're non-different from Krishna himself, and that the Bhagavad Gita is considered the sound representation of Krishna himself, because it was spoken by Krishna. So this is considered Shruti. You have Shruti and Smriti. So when you're hearing directly from Krishna, this is considered Shruti, and Smriti is Srimad Bhagavatam, because it's not Krishna himself speaking, but it is been spoken by his devotees about Krishna. So Srila Vyasadeva, he's speaking about Krishna, so this is considered Smriti. So Shruti and Smriti, these are different types of sastra that we have, directly spoken by Krishna or spoken about Krishna. So Srila Vyasadeva, he's given us, he originally wrote the Vedanta Sutras, the Brahma Sutras, but still he was unsatisfied, even though he was, empowered incarnation of Krishna, as Srila Vyasadeva giving us the Vedic literature. Despite his whole endeavour to give us the Vedanta Sutra, he still wasn't satisfied, and his spiritual master Narada Muni appeared and says, what you've actually done is you're given an allowance for the general society to try to enjoy this material world, even if it is according to Vedic injunction. The human nature, particularly in Kali Yuga, is that we'll try to exploit these sort of instructions, that instead of using these instructions to become spiritually advanced, it's going to be how do I exploit the different Vedic instructions to try and enjoy in this world. So Narada Muni, he advised that you should write Srimad Bhagavatam, which of course coming from the Vedas, but specifically focused on Krishna himself. It's about Krishna and Krishna's devotees. There's not anything about karmakanda activities or, you can try enjoy in this material world but just follow the Vedic principles. It is focused only on Krishna himself. So this is like the perfection of Srila Vyasadeva's activities, that whilst he received the Vedic literature divided into 4 sections, and summarised it with Vedanta Sutra, but it's understood the natural commentary of the Vedas is Srimad Bhagavatam. Anything that's valuable from Srimad Bhagavatam, from the Vedas, is included in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And in the very beginning we hear that Bhagavatam is a natural literature, that it's not, it kicks out Kaitava Dharma. So Kaitava Dharma means cheating religion. And the Kavichandra Maharaj, he preaches a lot in Africa. So they get a lot of like Christian preachers in Africa. And in the beginning, it was like worship Jesus, worship God, and everything will be nice, etc. But he says now what it's come down to is that if you worship Jesus, you'll become rich. More or less, that's their message. And they get, whether they're actual wealthy people or people who are acting as rich, they come out on stage and I become a Christian, this happened and that happened and so many things happen, and now I'm wealthy and I have so many businesses. There's just, that's the message that's been given. And so the simple villagers, they're hearing that and think, well, if I become a Christian, then, all these good things will happen to me. So this is Kaitava Dharma. In other words, thinking that you're going to get some material benefit by engaging in devotional service. So, of course, that's not the message of Christianity, but they've twisted it in that sense. But Bhagavatam kicks out this Kaitava Dharma and presents only that knowledge which is free from the desire for karma, sense gratification, and gyan, mental speculation. As we know, 5,000 years ago, Krishna left the planet, and then so the question is presented in Bhagavatam, specifically 1.3.43, that Krishna swa dhamopagate dharma gyanadibi saha kalo nasta drishamesha puranako dunaditaha. So this Bhagavad Purana, Srimad Bhagavatam, is as brilliant as the sun, and it has arisen just after the departure of Lord Krishna to his own abode, accompanied by religion, knowledge, and so on, persons who have lost their vision. Because of the dense darkness of ignorance in the age of Kali, will get light from this Purana. So even though Krishna has departed, accompanied with religion, knowledge, etc., still Bhagavatam has remained to replace Krishna personally. So it's not that we're left to our own devices in the dark age of Kali, but those who have lost their vision because of this dense darkness of ignorance will get light from this Purana. So a lot of times people, particularly in India here, scholars and etc., they're quoting from all the different Vedas, Upanishads and this Purana and etc., etc. But Krishna is present there, but he's hidden, and it's very difficult to find, to properly understand who Krishna is and where he's appearing and how to approach him. Because, originally the Vedas was about 100,000 different books. And, of course, a lot of them have been lost now. But for somebody to say, I studied the Vedas, really it's a meaningless thing because there's so many so the whole process has been simplified so that we're just reading the books that Prabhupada has given us, Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam, and we're getting the essence of the Vedas there. And Krishna is directly there. We don't have to try to find where he's appearing in Bhagavatam, because on every page we hear about him, about his activities and his dealings with his devotees. So, and just on this last point, I guess it's a little bit cryptic, but about Prabhupada specifically mentioned this Dwapara Ado, that he mentions at the end of the purport that Vyasadeva appeared at the end of Dwapara Yuga as the son of Satyavati, because that was his mother Satyavati, his father was Parashara Muni. And therefore the word Dwapara Ado, or the beginning of Dwapara Yuga, so it doesn't really, Vyasadeva appeared at the end, but Dwapara Ado means at the beginning. So Prabhupada is just clarifying this based on Srila Jiva Goswami's example, that the logic of this statement, according to Srila Jiva Goswami, is comparable to that of calling the upper portion of the tree the beginning. So, normally you think the beginning of the tree is the root, but when the tree is coming out of the ground, the first part you see is the upper portion of the tree, what becomes the branches, etc. So the root of the tree is the beginning of the tree, but in common knowledge the upper portion of the tree is first seen. In that way, the end of the tree, or the top of the tree, is accepted as its beginning. So it's just, as I said, a little bit cryptic, but the point being made is the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam is when Sukadeva Goswami appears and speaks Bhagavatam. So this is at the end of Dwapara Yuga and moving into Kali Yuga. So by our great fortune, Prabhupada has given us, it translated Bhagavatam into English. So even though it was spoken 5,000 years ago, now, today, every day, we have the great fortune of being able to open Bhagavatam and hear about Krishna on every page. All right, thank you very much. Any questions or comments? I'll just read the verse again. At the end of Dwapara Yuga, I studied this great supplement of Vedic literature named Srimad Bhagavatam, which is equal to all the Vedas, from my father, Srila Dwapayana Vyasadeva. Dwapayana means island born. Satyavati and Parashara, they conceived Srila Vyasadeva in a boat by an island in the river. Anyway, it's the whole story there, but that's where the word Dwapayana comes from, island born. Is there any questions or comments at all? Okay, thank you very much. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
You know.